they're not going to be here. So we need to make that statement. This says they're not going to come 5 minutes from now. My one concern is, I see the GOP legislative leaders talk, but I don't hear anything from the DFL. How come we don't hear something from the leaders of the House of Representatives or the Senates? How come we don't hear somebody? But we're not hearing anybody. And I think that's what we need to do. We need to get our representatives. They may not represent us, but we need to get them to have a voice going. Thank you.
My name's Rebecca Cosbob. I live in Eagan, and this concern is about health care cuts. I'm very concerned about the Republican proposal to do more cuts to health care services. As a psych nurse that lived through the devastation, my patients suffered when Governor Plenty did these cuts to patient services. I just want to make a little bit of some of you realize some of the things that happen. In spite of our best efforts as doctors and nurses, I work in psychiatry to try and help patients and meet their needs. We just weren't able to under the restrictions that we had with the cuts. So patients that had been stable and functional became worse often due to the cuts, some to the point of becoming suicidal and needing hospitalization, and many had nowhere to go. Those that had GAMC got totally F'd off the map, except for 2 hospitals that tried to serve this large population. And patients' lives, families, and jobs fell apart. I have many examples, which I won't go into now. I finally could not work in these limitations anymore. The results I observed were just too horrific. And I had constant fear that someone that I cared for would suicide and for lack of care. And I ended up retiring sooner than I had planned to after 45 years in nursing. I felt it was literally inhumane, and I can't even imagine what effect more cuts to health care would cause. I believe people in Minnesota deserve access to affordable and quality health care. Instead of unfair cuts, more cuts to sick people, I would ask you to please raise taxes on the richest, 2% or whatever percent. Not as a punishment, but just because it's time they share in this solution. And also, there's another suggestion that I've just heard of, that is that putting a cap on HMO financial reserves may be helpful, as they have an excess and we need that money back now. And an immediate cap on HMO reserves would recoup millions of dollars and prevent devastating cuts to health care. And I know jobs are a concern too, and that's a concern for me too, but this is the area I know about. Thank you.
My name is Wood. Actually, everybody calls me Leroy. I'm from Eagan.
Speak as loudly as you can.
Yes, I will. Basically, I was raised in Minnesota most of my life, and then I joined the service. Basically, Minnesota, I traveled all over the world, the country.
Speak up, please.
Okay, sorry. Traveled all over the world and all over the state. In Minnesota, back in '82, when Reagan had, basically they had the Reaganomics, as everybody would know, well known. I got out of the Navy, worked in the shipyards, and I lost my job. Just couldn't find any jobs anywhere. Finding out Minnesota always for them to take care of their own people. So when I came back home, I was sort of down and out homeless. With some of the programs that Minnesota had, I got back on my feet. Mental health helped a lot. Basically, I'm an alcoholic. Or actually recovering. For the federal government. I'm a supervisor for a pipe fitting shop. Basically, I bought a house 3 years ago. question I want the GOP to understand, want to know. Why is it that the middle class is suffering like, per se, like the soldiers in Vietnam that came out, how they were treated badly? Why are they treating us just as bad? That's what I wanted to ask them.
Yes. Yep.
Thank you.
Not really accustomed to speaking in front of people, so you'll have to excuse me. Never been to a community meeting like this before, and I guess I was somewhat naive because I thought the representatives would be here for us
Still got time.
to talk to. I guess I was just going to say to them that I wish they'd be a little bit reasonable here. Like I said, everything's a negotiation. You know, there's probably some places we could cut budget. But when the governor went into this, I think he was talking about a $5 billion shortfall. He's down to trying to make that up with $4 billion of cuts and $1 billion of additional revenue. I think that's a reasonable compromise. Basically, Republicans are getting 80% of what they want. If you've been through any negotiation, if you get 80% of what you want, you've done a hell of a job. But this isn't enough for them, apparently. I don't understand this intractable, no compromise, no revenue, nothing but cuts. I don't understand it. I don't think it's fair. I wish they were here. I wish they'd reconsider. Thank you.
I'm a transit worker. I drive a city bus. And the Metropolitan Council, some of you may be aware, they started to talk about the shortfall from the state proposed budget that was not adopted, was not signed by the governor. Includes a lack of state subsidy. It's $109 million over the next 2 years. And the Metropolitan Council, to make up for this shortfall, would have to cut their transit system about 25%, which would really eviscerate service to some of the more outlying areas and weekend service and whatnot. And this leads to my question for my representative, Diane Anderson, and my representative, Senator Ted Daley, because I live here in Eagan. Why do they think this is a good idea in the budget that they proposed? They said that their budget was supposed to attract businesses to our state and make an atmosphere conducive to businesses. And when we, as a metropolitan region, are competing against regions like Seattle and Portland and Houston and Denver, which have all made major transit investments and have continued to support their transit systems, and we are getting ready to cut ours by 0.25%. How will this attract good paying jobs to our cities? And that is my question for my senator and my representative.
I've been a resident of Eagan for 13 years, and I went on the web today to find out some facts. And one of the things I found out from the National Bureau of Economic Research is that the state tax rate for very high income earners in the state of Minnesota in 1978 was 9.29%. In 1991, that dropped to 8.75%. In 2005, that dropped to 8.09%. And in 2009, that dropped to 7.93%. It is time. It is time for the rich to pay their share. Another statistic that we've heard recently. Another statistic that we've heard recently is that 25% of Minnesota's children live under the poverty level. I work with a lot of those children, and I know their lives. I also know that our property taxes are going up, so when they say there's no taxes, they're lying, because our property taxes are going up. Many senior citizens will not be able to afford to stay in their homes if it continues. And at the same time, our education issues are looming all over the place. Every year since, when I first came to Minnesota, my children were in high school, and things were really good, and then all of a sudden, there was cuts. The board was cutting this, the board was cutting that program. Now the children, it's thought of, it's normal for children to have to go and pay to be on the soccer team, or to, what do children do who can't afford that? And, you know, it's just, a lot of our education systems have been cut. I've called my Republican representatives, because that's all I've had for the last few years, and I've asked to be heard.
My name's Steve Mahal. I live here in Eagan. I'm a single father of 3 children, 2 teenage daughters. Some of you know what that's like. It's what's been going on has been really tough. I've got thousands of my brothers and sisters that are not working right now. You know, all the road construction stopped. I'm fortunate enough to be working. I'm a crane operator, and there's a lot fewer of us. I didn't have anything planned to say really, but I'm kind of trying to gather my thoughts as I go along. Seeing people that don't care about us, that we put there, that's what really tweaks me out the worst. Present company excluded. But I'm telling you, we're all putting attention, and they don't care. They've got money and they're going to wait it out. They can wait it out, we can't. And while we lose everything, they can gather everything up that we've lost because they've got the money to do it. They're not hearing us, they're not listening to us, they don't care about us. I don't know what we can do, but something's got to be done because this is ridiculous. When you've got a bunch of people that are sitting around and they just won't do anything because, well, you know what? We don't want to do that because he's not with us. This is ridiculous. Like I said, work's bad for a lot of folks. Like I said, I got 3 kids. I do it all on my own. I don't have any child support that comes into me. If the shoe was on the other foot, my feet would be held to the fire, but that's another story. But it's tight, it's tough. I got one that's driving, I still got to pay her insurance, she's working and she's helping out. And thank goodness she's able to work. But it's tight, and I understand. I ride my motorcycle back and forth to work every day because $10 is easier to cough up every week than $80. Let's face it, things are getting worse and worse and worse. So my question is could you stop having a pissing match back and forth and let's get it done?
Work at MnDOT, almost 29 years. The last shutdown I actually worked because construction projects were ongoing, and I'm the state utilities engineer, so I sign all the permits and the agreements that when we have utilities on our state right of way. And I just can't believe how much money we've already wasted in preparing for the shutdown. We sent out certified letters to 1,600 utility companies or permittees because telling them that their permits are suspended. Of course, that's all the local agency projects as well that there's any MnDOT resources that are going into because there's 200 people out of 5,000 at all of MnDOT that are working right now. And I definitely wouldn't want to be one of them anyway because they have to cover pretty much 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, deal with the pavement blow-ups, deal with the rail crossings that go out because of the storms. Because it really is a matter of life and death with a lot of the things that we deal with every day. But it has, like I said, there's so much money that has been wasted already, and the longer it goes, the worse it is. $500 million worth of contracts, construction contracts that are put on hold. With our construction season being so short, you know that those projects are going to be delayed, and if this goes on for a long time, I could see maybe half of our projects being cut because of the funding that we're going to lose, the lawsuits, the mobilization, the demobilization, the remobilization again, because those are huge costs. The contractors can't afford to just leave this very expensive equipment on these jobs. They're going to be taking them to other states if this continues for very long. And then, how are we going to get our projects done when we finally do get back to work? Are they going to be available? It's just completely frustrating, and I feel for myself as a state employee who's laid off, but more so as a taxpayer. It is such a waste. And for all the other people, I have several people that work for me, and it's a bad situation for them. I feel like, yes, I'm going to make it through, but it's so hard not knowing how long it's going to be until we can go back to work. And why couldn't we have can we get some kind of an amendment that requires that the budgets are done first, and then they can go with, you know, do the work? How can we present that? And say the budget is the first thing that you deal with, and then you can go on and talk about all these other social issues. It's just so unfair to throw all of that in the mix with the budget.
Thank you.
Dwayne Budarak. I'm actually a transplant down here to Eagan. I'm actually from the Iron Range. And the company, I've been laid off. I got laid off in 2008. Got a temporary job, got laid off from there. Finally got hired on with Minnesota Department of Transportation. It's a job I love. It's unbelievable. Even with all the snow plowing we had to do in the blow-ups, it's a great job. But the company I worked prior to that, I negotiated contracts for the employees there for 20-some odd years. And I know negotiations are not the easiest thing to do, especially when you're dealing with a small company. Money's tight. We all know that. And there were times where I had to pull back on my principles and take less, or do something I wasn't willing to do just for the better for the group. Better, move it on to keep people working. I'd like to know, my question to my representatives here is, you know, where is the art of negotiations when it's my way or the highway? Yeah. You know, you gotta find a middle ground. You gotta do it. You know, we had one woman come up here and talked about tyranny. I find it odd that Senator Daley, his group was handing out constitutions at the Eagan parade. Yet, if you ever read the Federalist Papers, the ideas behind that went into that Constitution. It said that Madison wrote that our government should be representative of all the people and not just a select group. And yet, they're representing millionaires and businesses. Why is that?
Good evening. And I agree with everything everybody said so far. What I wanted to talk about is nonprofits. I work for the Department of Public Safety, the Office of Justice Programs. And within that, there's a number of units. There's crime victim reparations, which is not being paid. Funeral services are not being paid for. People who've been assaulted, not being paid for. Hospital bills, not being paid for. Another unit, the one that I work in, is Crime Victim Services. We've got 160 grantees, mainly nonprofits. We get federal, state money to support those. Battered women's shelters across the state of Minnesota. We've got CAP agencies in every community in the state. We've got sexual assault services. We've got services for battered children. We've got parenting time centers where people need to be able to exchange their children safely, not being paid for. I personally have got 36 counties within the state that's part of my area. I've got the southern part of the state, north, south, east, and west. And I've got 30 grantees within that of all those varieties that I just discussed. And I've been on the phone with those people, with executive directors, with employees calling me, with board people calling me, what are we going to do? And they live paycheck to paycheck just like we do. And they are worried, they're scared, they're talking about shutting the doors, they're talking about going out of business. And I've been working with the state in this crime victim unit for 11 years, and I've never seen anything like this. I've never seen so many people frightened, so many people saying, what are we going to do? How can we serve these people? Because the victims don't stop coming. And I've heard people say, even if we don't get paid, we're going to serve these people because they need us. And what have we got? We've got empty chairs. So what I'm saying to you is I worked in battered women's programs prior to coming to the state 11 years ago. For another 12 years, I worked in battered women's shelters. And we're all being victimized right now. I can tell a victim, no problem. And I wish you all well.
I'm glad that we're doing this evening. I guess, unfortunately, I feel less than optimistic that anything that we do has much impact on these people. I've had some interaction with Diane Anderson lately, and it, my first actual face-to-face with her was at the Eagan Fun Fest at which, you know, at one point she actually shoved me away. She didn't want to hear what I said. So I did go back to her and she apologized to me for having done that. But basically that's very representative of what this group of people does. It's really my way or get out of my way. And she did call me at my home last night. And it was, you know, I said to her that, you know, if this philosophy that you're proposing actually resulted in a positive result, I think a lot of people would be willing to go along with that. But we've had so many instances where it has been a total failure. I mean, taxes are the lowest in the state and in this country that they've ever been. We should be rolling in clover right now, and we're not. So why are we doing this? And when I pointed out to her about, you know, what happened in '93 with the Bill Clinton budget, et cetera, and she said, well, that's because of all the good things that Ronald Reagan did. And I pointed out, you know, the two things. Number one, there was a president in between Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. I don't think she knows that, but I pointed out to her that Ronald Reagan raised taxes numerous times. That she didn't know. You know,
oh, great!
I mean, these people, this particular one, at any rate, that are representing us, are unaware of our history. And so basically, once again, I don't know if we can keep the state shut down till 2012. I hope not. You know, and I guess another thing that they say is we don't have to worry about property taxes going up in Eagan because we don't get local government aid in Eagan. Another thing that just drives me up the wall, because as we all know, property taxes have gone up in Eagan as well. But even if it were true that they don't go up in Eagan, does that mean we don't give a damn about the rest of the state? And this, again, is the attitude of this bunch of people. It's that we don't have to care about everybody. You know, we only care about a certain group of people. And I would like to point out to them, had they been here, that nearly 50% of people did not vote for them. That is not a mandate, what they have. If there were no other facts, that would be enough to say it's time to compromise on these issues.
And that's what I want to talk about is budget. They keep comparing our state budget to household budgets. They're playing rob Peter to pay Paul. In your household budget, if you don't have enough revenue coming in and you keep saying, I'm going to forgo paying this so I can pay this, and this gets behind, so then you start saying, okay, I got to start paying this so I can pay that, things start getting behind. You can't do the repairs on your house, which is your infrastructure. Your house starts falling down around your ears. If they continue the path that they're going, Minnesota, which is our house, is going to start falling down around our ears. Do we bring in business when that happens? No. Businesses look at us and they say, they're putting nothing towards education. There's nothing there. It's an uneducated workforce at this point. We don't want an uneducated workforce. We want an educated. They've had bridges fall down and they have bridges closed because they're about to fall down. And they're not putting money towards repairing it. They have roads you can't drive on. Their infrastructure is falling apart. Why do we want to be there? Right now, per capita, we have the highest number of Fortune 500 companies in Minnesota. We want to keep them. We want to draw more. They continue their little, I don't want to hear ya, my way or the highway attitude. You know what? These companies are going to leave. And these companies that are putting all the money in their pockets for their elections are not going to be here. And then they're going to be sitting here going, well, why am I being left out to dry? You know what? Elect them out. Leave them be left out to dry that way. But understand that if they don't start compromising, our state goes down the tubes. I grew up in the South. I was lucky I grew up in Virginia, which was a good state in terms of how well they were doing when I grew up there. I don't want to be Mississippi. That's not why I moved to Minnesota 21 years ago. I moved to Minnesota because great education, great opportunities, the ability for me to stay home with my children and raise them for a while before I had decided I wanted to go back to work. I essentially had to go back to work because I was going nuts being home while they were at school. And there's only so much volunteering a person can do. So we moved here so that I could do that. But the way it's going, we've got families working 2 and 3 jobs, both parents. And that's not right, because they're paying for every dollar that they earn, they're keeping less than 80 cents. Whereas the wealthiest are keeping over 90 cents of of every dollar they earn. So my question becomes, why is what they earn? Why are they allowed? Why is it more important that they keep more of what they earn? They don't create the jobs. We do. We do when we have disposable income. And we can spend it on entertainment, when we can spend it on the new TV, when we can stop driving our 18-year-old cars and finally afford to buy a new one, when we can start putting money back into our communities because we have the income. But if it keeps being taken from us from taxes, our wages are going down. And we don't have the money to spend. And our state is falling apart. What are we getting out of it?
My name is Doug DeGroat, and I've lived in Eagan for about 13 years. And I've been active in the Take Action healthcare campaign. And surprisingly, there is a healthcare angle to our budget problem. And if my representatives were here, I would say that at the beginning of this session, even the Republicans were for a proposal that would take money back from HMOs. Basically, for over about 20 years or so, the state of Minnesota has paid too much in services for medical assistance. And HMOs have basically put up a $500 million reserve. And at the beginning of the session, it was a hot idea. Even Republicans were for this thing, to try and claw back some of that excess reserves. All of a sudden, it's become stone cold, and I don't know why that is, because that money could help restore health care for 140,000 Minnesotans. And it's money that they were excited to grab at the beginning of the session, and now they're sort of stone cold quiet. So I put out a little flyer and with a suggested message, and I would ask our legislators why you were so the caucus, the Republican caucus, was enthusiastic for this idea at the beginning of the session, and now when it comes down to crunch time, they're not considering this money. So I urge all of you to try and contact our legislators, because there is basically it's a clawback provision that would take excess money from HMOs that they earned through the public programs and put that into a budget solution.
I'm Carol Heffernan from Eagan. Daley and Wardlow are my representatives, and I've been around long enough to listen to 30 years of Republicans in Washington saying lower taxes and less regulation is going to take this country down the path to golden roads. And for 30 years, it hasn't happened. The only good times we had was when Clinton raised taxes in the 90s, and then we did have what they predicted. For the last 8 years in Minnesota, Tim Pawlenty has promised us golden roads if only we'll lower taxes and lessen regulations, and we haven't gotten it. After this period of time, we should be swimming in jobs with no unemployment and employers begging people to come to work for them. They are not. What makes you think it's going to work now? What has changed since Governor Pawlenty left office that is going to make lower taxes work now?
My question to the representatives that didn't show, and I did call them, left messages at their offices saying this has to be part of the solution. the richest of us, the most, which isn't me, but the people who can afford to have to pay their fair share. I think one of the proposals that was out there was Governor Dayton had gotten down to 0.5%, the top 0.5%, and even that wasn't sufficient to them. They weren't even going to do that. So basically, they're picking the top 0.5% over another 99.5% of us. So they're not representing us. And that's my question to them. Why do they favor the 99.5%? I mean, 0.5% over the 99.5%. It's really a sick game of survivor they're playing. They have the money, the rest of us don't, and they think they can outlast us. So we have to stay strong, and they have to pay their fair share.
I'm from Eagan High School. I'm actually going to be a senior next year. And the thing I want to talk today is basically about education, specifically higher education. I can't empathize with everyone here that may have lost their job due to the government shutdown, but I certainly do sympathize. And the thing that concerns me today is the legislative proposal proposed by the people that were supposed to be here, and their attitude towards higher education. On their websites, every single one of them said that they supported higher education because of the jobs that it creates for Minnesota. And under Dayton's proposal, he proposes cutting $77 million from the U of M and $76 million from state universities. And I get that, that isn't the greatest thing in the world, but I guess it's understandable. We have to balance the budget somehow. But in turn, the legislators proposed tripling that number to $244 million for the University of Minnesota and $180 million for state universities. So my question is, at what point is keeping taxes low? And I get that keeping taxes low creates jobs, but at what point are we losing more jobs through cutting so much in education in the long term? And then they talk about how in the long term these tax cuts will create jobs because it'll create a good business atmosphere. My question is to the senators and representatives that are supposed to be here today, is at what point is making these massive cuts to our higher education system going to hurt us more in the long term than these supposed benefits from tax cuts? And just as a student who in a year is going to have to make the choice whether or not to go to a state university or go out of state, looking at it the way it might be now, there's more likelihood that I might leave and never come back, and I won't be contributing to Minnesota's economy because the situation just simply isn't good here. And that's something that I think our legislators have to be concerned with today.
Yes.